My name is Nancy Carver, and I've written a new book entitled Making Tracks. It's the untold story of the history of horse racing in St. Louis from 1767 to 1905. You may wonder why I chose to write a book about horse racing. Well, the answer's right here, in Tillis Park, which was donated to the city in the memory of my great-great-grandmother, Rosalie Tillis. I'm standing right next to the monument dedicated to my uncle, Cap Andrew Tillis, who donated the park in his mother's name. Cap was a fascinating individual. He had a number of ventures that he was involved in, but if you queried him about what he did, he'd just reply, "I'm a capitalist." One of his most interesting ventures was that of a racetrack owner. He, along with two of his friends, formed a racetracking syndicate that owned several tracks in St. Louis and several more in other states. In fact, they built a track in Louisville, Kentucky to rival the legendary Churchill Downs. It was the only one that was a financial failure. Today, over 100 years after the end of horse racing in St. Louis, Oaklawn Park in Hot Springs, Arkansas, is still owned by family members of one of Cap's original partners. It's considered one of the best horse racing venues in the United States. But let's get back to the horse racing in St. Louis. Did you know there were almost 20 racetracks in St. Louis? But they're no longer here today, but we can see some of their sites, so why don't you follow me and let's go visit some. We're here at the site of the old South Side racetrack at the corner of Russell and Missouri Avenues. Today, it's a magnet school in the city called the McKinley Junior Classical Academy. In 1896, the Republicans held a national convention in St. Louis. They nominated William McKinley, who ran on the gold standard. People were so happy that he ran, they held a parade, and people wore gold jackets and black pants. They called themselves Gold Bugs. The name stuck for them, as well as became the namesake for McKinley High School. Before that, the location was used for baseball. It was called Amateur Park and then Brotherhood Park, and it was where the previous owners wanted to start a new baseball team in the Brotherhood League. But the Brotherhood League was short-lived, and new owners came, including my uncle, and they decided this would be the proper venue for a racetrack. One of his partners was Al Spink, who formed the Sporting News, which was a long-running sporting newspaper both here in St. Louis and throughout the country. You might wonder how a racetrack fit into this site, because it doesn't look like it's very big. Actually, the racetrack was half the size of a regulation racetrack. In the 1890s, racetrack fever was at a high pitch, and people were starting racetracks everywhere. They called them merry-go-rounds and Jerichos because they were the smaller tracks. But this particular racetrack had a unique place in racing history. It was the site of the very first night racing in the country. How they did that was pretty tricky because in the 1890s, elimination wasn't that easy to deal with. But thanks to one of the partners, who was the father of a very famous cartoonist, they learned how to do it, and the rest is history. University City, the Loop, Eastgate, Westgate. The Loop took its name from the area on Heman Avenue where the streetcars let passengers off to go to the racetrack and the adjacent Delmar Gardens amusement park. Eastgate and Westgate were entrances to Delmar Park. Now, don't confuse Delmar Park with Delmar Park in California. They were actually two different racetracks. Delmar Park in St. Louis was the last racetrack in St. Louis, and it was the scene of a notorious raid by the governor of the state. Governor Joseph Folk decided in 1905 that he wanted to end gambling in St. Louis forever. So he sent St. Louis Mounted Police to the city to raid the park, and the park ended. The site of the racetrack is now being developed by Washington University. Student housing is being erected, and 22,000 square feet of retail space is being built. The racetrack is gone, the horses are gone, but the site will live on, and thousands more people will come here. We're here on Natural Bridge near Vandeventer. It's the site of Beaumont High School today. It used to be the site of New Sportsman's Park, the home of the St. Louis Browns. The St. Louis Browns and horse racing share a lot of history. In fact, they shared the facility at this site. It was all because of Chris Vonderah, who is often referred to as the father of the St. Louis Cardinals. Chris was a larger-than-life person. Like many modern stadium owners, he understood that you had to have multifunctional facilities in order to increase revenue. And he needed to finance the ever-increasing payroll of his baseball team. So he came up with the idea of having a racetrack inside of his baseball field. We're here at Fairground Park. Did you know that way before we had the World's Fair in 1904, St. Louisans were asking to meet them at the fair? In fact, as early as the 1840s, St. Louis started having fairs to entertain not only the people in St. Louis, but to draw other people to the region. In 1858, the first grandiose fair occurred here and gave this plot of land its name, Fairgrounds. The fair held exhibits for agricultural products as well as mechanical products, but a lot of exhibits were held for horses. And they had an amphitheater here that they used primarily for trotters and pacers. They eventually added a much larger racetrack for fast racing. In 1904, they held the World's Fair Handicap here with an extraordinary purse. The size was larger than most racetracks in the country, and the track rivaled just about any racetrack in the country. If you would like to know more about horse racing and the tracks that were here in St. Louis, why don't you purchase the book? And if it's not available at your local bookstore, you can contact Therapeutic Horsemanship. They'll be glad to help you make the purchase.